Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Muddy York. This is another special episode because we've tracked down another fantastic guest. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mark Maloney.
Hello.
Thanks for being here today. Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well. It's actually a very nice day when we're recording. Don't know what it's like when you're listening, but we can hope for the best. Now, we invited Mark because he has recently published a book about Toronto's mayors called Toronto's Mayors, creatively enough, A History of the City's Leaders. And now's a chance for Mark just to tell the people who you are and why you decided to write the book.
Well, I've been involved in municipal politics for quite a while. I was a city councillor in Ottawa for 8 years, and then and also chaired the Board of Health there. And I moved to Toronto in 1997 and began working with Barbara Hall. She was a mayor at the time, and since that time, I have worked for three mayors, either in their campaign or at City Hall. So the one thing that I guess really sparked my doing the book was when Barbara was mayor, she wanted everything. She wanted details. She was a lawyer and very, wanting to have best information possible. So to do a briefing note for her, you do 10 pages. When she was defeated by Mel Lastman for mayor in 1997, when Mel came in the first day, he sent around a note to the staff to say, if you give me a briefing note that's longer than 125 words or 3 bullet points, I won't read it. So it kind of sparked my curiosity. I said to myself, wow, that's a very different style. So I started to think, like, I wonder what all the other ones were like. So that's what got me going.
Well, before we get into our main topic, something I wonder, just as I've started doing research for this podcast, is why there seem to be almost no books written about Toronto's mayors, with the notable exception of William Lyon Mackenzie and the recent Rob Ford. There is virtually nothing, maybe one book written in the 60s or bio from an aide from the 20s. Any sense of why this is such an unexplored area?
Well, I think a few reasons. There was a history, a buff, a historian type, an author. His name was Middleton, and he did publish like histories of the city, but he went up to about 1923, and then there was nothing. The former City of Toronto archivist Victor Russell did publish a short book, and it was actually quite a good book. He had intended to do it in 2 volumes, so volume 1, volume 2. Volume 1 took the mayors up until 1899, and then he never, for some reason, I don't know why, but never finished the volume 2. So in essence, there has been no one has done all of the mayors, of the present.
All right. So the topic that you wanted to talk about is what we're calling inspiring mayors. And these are mayors who, through some personal quality, we're trying to keep this apolitical as a giant podcast about mayors can be. But we're looking at some personal qualities here. And we came up with some 8 people, and we've organized them around sort of 4 broad themes that we're calling personal bravery, charity, forward-thinkingness, and what I call get it doneness. We'll maybe explain that a bit more when we get to it. But of the quality of personal bravery, I guess we'll just start with a mayor from the late 19th century. This is the 1870s. But before he became mayor, in fact, several decades earlier, he did something that was profoundly brave or foolhardy, depending on your point of view. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, Mayor Joseph Sheard in 1871. So you have to understand the context of the situation. This is years before he was elected mayor. He was a person who was responsible for kind of building, certain things for the city. And so, in the context of the 1837 rebellion, which was a massive thing in Toronto, where the a rebel force led by our first mayor and his compatriots tried to overthrow the established British system. So when that happened, there were a couple of folks in the rebellion who were captured and tried and sentenced. Samuel Lount and Peter Matthews, and they were sentenced to hang. And the uh, the task was given to Joseph Sheard to build the actual gallows to upon which they would be hung, and he refused at great personal um, risk to himself. So that was a real true element of bravery at the time. Yes,
Did you get any insight into why he chose to refuse? Like, what was the driving force behind that?
he was sympathetic to the rebellion, but he did not actively participate in the rebellion. But he was sympathetic, and he just felt he could not do it as an act of conscience to have these people who he really did not believe that they deserved to die just because they were rebels. I mean, you have to understand too. William Lyon Mackenzie, our first mayor, and the other one, Morrison, who was our third mayor, they also had to escape Canada and actually flee to the United States for their actions in the rebellion. Morrison himself never participated in the rebellion. He was sympathetic, but he had to flee on you know on pain of certain death himself. So, so two mayors had to flee, and others were hung.
So they had to flee, but did Joseph Sheard ever face any political backlash or anything like that from?
No,
No.
no, he not that I know that I found, no.
Oh,
And in fact, when he was elected mayor, he was well thought of, very very well regarded.
Do you know why he got away with it? Because the political conditions in Upper Canada after the rebellion were hysteria is probably not an overstatement. Why did the family compact let him get away with it?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I will let you guys research that one.
Yeah, we'll do some more research in our next episode. We'll come back with some with some ideas.
Now, another mayor who displayed exceptional bravery in what were truly hellish circumstances was a mayor from the early 20th century named George Reginald Geary. And this actually came after his term as mayor, right?
That's right. Yes.
So what did he do?
So Reg Geary was a young mayor. When he was first elected in 1910, he was called the bachelor mayor because he was not yet married, and he kind of campaigned on the platform of he could spend all his time working for the city and he didn't have to worry about looking after family and whatever. So he was very popular. He got reelected in a massive way. So he was the mayor from 1910 to 1912, and then he stepped down voluntarily to become what's called the Corporation Council, which is essentially the leading lawyer in the city. So you're the city's top lawyer. So he did that, and World War One began. So 2 years after World War One, two years after he had left the office and the World War had begun, he enlisted. He had never had any prior experience in the military. So he served in the 35th Canadian Battalion Expeditionary Force. And he served in active duty in World War One, and he also um, helped locate missing Canadians who'd been captured. But the thing that was very, very amazing about the guy was he was literally in the trenches. He was trenches of the Western Front. Dark, dank trenches that were filled with nothing but mud and horror and people being killed. And he was badly gassed in the trenches himself. He was later awarded the Military Cross and the Order of the British Empire. But you have to understand, talk about here you are, you're mayor of Toronto in 1912, and 2 years later, you're in the trenches on your knees and on your stomach in the middle of dirt. And I think that was a true act of bravery in terms of somebody that did that. But they didn't have to have done that, but they did it out of service.
So did he give up his time being mayor to fight in the war? Like somebody take over his position? What happened there?
No. What happened was he had left to become the corporation counsel, and it was 2 years later when 2014 or
Right.
1914 came along. So it was 2 years after being mayor, and to go from mayor of Toronto to being on your stomach in the trenches is quite an amazing phenomenon.
I don't know if there's any information about it, but I feel like somebody in his position probably would have been exempt from fighting in battle potentially, but he decided to go anyways.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Wow. Crazy. So if we're continuing the bravery theme, Adam, who are we talking about next?
Well, actually, we're going to be shifting to the other side
Right.
of the virtue spectrum, to charity.
Okay.
And these were people who were showing the softer side of politics. So the first name on this list is Thomas Morrison. Now, Mark, you mentioned him earlier as someone who had to flee after the rebellion, but in addition to being mayor and rebel of sorts, he was also a physician and introduced an interesting policy a few years before he became mayor. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Thomas Morrison was mayor for 1 year. He was a reformer, and he in 1832, before becoming mayor, he and two physician colleagues, keeping in mind, of course, in Toronto in those days was a very, very, and it was actually York at the time, was a very, very small community of 8,000 or 9,000 people. So he and two colleagues founded what was called the York Dispensary, and it lasted 8 months, and it was what I like to call Canada's first system of basic pharmacare. They carried out the prescribing and the distribution of free medicines to some 746 people in the city, which was still then the town of York. So I think it shows quite a charitable side of, well before. I mean, we didn't have Medicare in Canada until the 1960s, and here he was in 1832 doing something like that.
And back then, as you said, there's no Medicare. What kind of health services were available if you couldn't afford to pay?
Well, I think at the time, the medical care services were so basic that if you couldn't pay, you didn't get the services. There was no other course of action, really. And I recall reading that physicians at that time, if somebody needed something, often the people coming in, patients, would pay them in fish and beef and in turkeys and goose, and like they would pay them in other forms, not in money, but
Well,
It's
in
funny. I just
fairness,
Googled. Oh, sorry. No, I just Googled York Dispensary. It still exists, but it is now a cannabis shop.
it's still dispensing medicine.
Yeah, still dispensing medicine. Yes.
So the next mayor on our charitable list is William McMurridge. who, in addition to having what may be the most Scottish name of all time, did something for a traveling musical group when it arrived in Toronto. So, Mark, what can you tell us?
Yes, it was a group called the Fisk Jubilee Singers from Nashville, black singers. And when they got to Toronto, they were denied accommodation. And so what happened was prominent citizens rose up to offer them accommodation in their home, and including Mayor McMurridge at the time, and offered them to billet them in their own home. Charitable thing to do, that the city at the time, there was a real anti-black prejudice pervasive throughout the city, and it was a very good thing to do. Yeah.
And how did the hotel react to this display of charity on their part?
Well, in the end, what I'm told is the hotel actually relented, right away, but relented, and they did change their policies. But there was a period of time in Toronto where, you could have people who were employed in the hotel, like a black employed in the hotel, but they were not allowed to actually stay in the hotel in which they worked. So it was a real double standard.
So it seems like the theme of a lot of the mayors that we've been talking about have kind of gone out on a ledge for their own personal beliefs. So do you have any examples of someone where that worked out negatively for them, or on the flip side, positively for them? Just taking a stance and it leading to either hurting their future in Toronto or improving drastically.
That's I'd have to put some thought into that one. That's a good question, though. In terms of and negatively, yeah. I'd have to think about that one.
So we're going to move on to another pair of mayors who displayed some forward-thinking ideas. These were some ideas that were even considered a little crackpotty at the time, but wound up being implemented decades after their time. So the first mayor was right at the turn of the century, and his name was Oliver Howland. And before becoming mayor, what was he pushing for?
Well, he was a pioneer in the sense of he believed in a St. Lawrence Seaway. Now, keep in mind that at that time, in the 1901 era, there was no seaway, and the idea was, he wanted to have what we know as the seaway now, all 5 Great Lakes flow into the ocean and encourage trade. And
Just to clarify for everyone at home, the St. Lawrence Seaway is what allowed traffic to go all the way from the Atlantic into the Great Lakes, because previously you had to stop at Montreal.
and vice versa, like from the Great Lakes to the ocean too. So yes.
Hmm.
So he was president of an organization called the International Deep Waterways Association. It was kind of like a lobby group that was pushing to get the seaway envisioned and then built from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic. And he was president. And then when he left that position as the head of the Deep Waterways, he was succeeded by none other than the U.S. industrialist John D. Rockefeller. So, he was a guy who was championing a thing well ahead of his time, decades ahead of his time. And it was later accomplished. And so he was one of the first one of the first people to really push the idea.
And he wasn't just a little bit ahead of his time. He was advocating this in the 1890s, and the Seaway wouldn't open until the 1950s.
Yeah, that's right. So the other thing he was forward-looking for is he had published a paper at the Canadian Bar Association in 1897 before becoming mayor, and he was the first person to advocate for an international court of justice. The international court, he saw it at that particular time being Canada, the U.S., and Great Britain. But we put that issue on the map, and later decades later, again, there is an international court. And the third area that he was very forward-looking is he began what was called the Union of Canadian Municipalities. And it was the first time to try and get cities in Canada together on the same page to be a voice together for municipal government and to advance issues with the federal government. The Union of Canadian Municipalities then became the official Federation of Canadian Municipalities that exists today. And he was its first national president in 1901. And it's interesting enough, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is having its board meeting today in Prince George, BC, of which two councillors in Toronto, Councillor McKelvey and Bradford, are representing the city on the FCM board. So it's a very relevant, very strong, very important organization today.
Okay. Now, the second mayor who we are looking at as forward thinking was named Fred Conboy, and his contribution wasn't quite so global as Oliver Howland's. Had more to do with the future of Toronto itself. So why don't you tell us about that?
Well, he did under his administration, there was a very ambitious transport plan unveiled, and keep in mind it was unveiled even prior to the end of World War II, and the thinking was that when the war was over, Toronto would grow, and we needed to prepare and we needed to look forward. So they had a very ambitious transport program, and one of them was a new high-speed roadway, and that roadway is today what is the Don Valley Parkway. And he also, at that time, they proposed a first subway under Yonge Street from Union Station up to St. Clair, and that was later accomplished. It didn't open until 1954. Took years to build, similar to the way the Ontario line is taking years to build, but these things take time. But both of those things were proposed and carried out. He also wanted a master plan, and the master plan was intended to take Toronto from the mid-1940s into the 1970s. It was to be a 30-year master plan. And was a very comprehensive look at a whole lot of things that were later carried out. Low-cost rental housing, a whole very, uniform and complex system of zoning, the system of parkways. He had a system of superhighways, and the superhighways actually began. You have to understand the context of the time. It was a car-centered environment at the time in the 40s and the 50s. So part of it began, which was the Spadina Expressway, which was later stopped. He wanted to tackle congestion. He wanted to have certain street widenings. Keeping in mind, Toronto in the downtown at that time was pretty congested and narrow. And removal...
Not like today.
Sorry?
Not like today. No one would ever describe downtown Toronto as congested now.
And he wanted to remove unsightly places downtown, like really bad unsightly buildings and situations.
I think it's hilarious that a guy named Convoy was in charge of some transportation initiatives.
He also, by the way,
Okay.
he was one of the first people to really champion Toronto. He saw Toronto as the future of aviation in Canada, like the future aviation hub,
Interesting.
which it is true. So, yeah,
Right.
he was forward-looking.
How did he, what did he do to
Well,
envision that?
he was championing it. At the time, you have to remember, there was no, we only had a small island airport at the time, and then the efforts became that they would have another second airport in Malton. So they took steps to later to get that Malton Airport, which is now Pearson Airport, of course, today. But
Yeah.
this was well ahead of any major aviation stuff. We were still in the middle of the war, and passenger aviation had not really taken off at that time. So,
This was a time where apparently you couldn't book your passenger flights online.
yes, right.
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
So our last category is what I'm calling "get it done." I don't know if that's the best phrase, but it's what we came up. And it's mayors who just managed to get things moving. Both of them came in at times of major change, and as we said, they got it done. Which looking at the last couple of decades in Toronto, is a very attractive quality. So one of them was Robert Saunders, who came in right after World War II, and what was some of his work about?
Well, he was a very inspirational and impressive guy. He had personal qualities that were really, I guess you could call in today's look at politicians and politics, were quite outstanding. I'm going to read you just a little bit about how he was publicly described in the press of the day. And I use these terms just to show how he was regarded, because it does convey the type of person he was. But the way he was described was intelligent, hardworking, high energy, ruggedly handsome, impeccably dressed, dynamic, charismatic. He combines policy and solid public relations. He's attractive and outgoing. He's dynamic and has high energy. He has the flourish of a showman. He has a distinct personal style, capable, energetic leadership, and a dramatic flair. And so those qualities really endeared him to people. And one of the groups on his council at the time were communists, and we had started to elect actual communists to Toronto City Council. Unlike Councillor Paula Fletcher, who's a former communist and was head of the Communist Party of Manitoba. But at the time, Time magazine featured Toronto on its cover of the American Time magazine, because we were literally the only city around that was electing communists to our city council. But Saunders had a very get it done style, and many of the things that Convoy had suggested for the 30-year plan, he actually brought into place. So he was a get it done kind of guy. And later, Saunders was appointed in 1948 to be the chair of the board of Ontario Hydro. At the time, he then had allowed him to really revamp the entire Ontario grid. But also, he was a pivotal person in carrying the Seaway construction and Seaway building, the St. Lawrence Seaway, and the sod turning was in 1954. So he was a active and dynamic guy, yeah.
So the last mayor on our list is the tiny perfect mayor. And full disclosure, the man who wrote the introduction to your book, so you're not completely impartial, but David Crombie. So why don't you, for those of our listeners who weren't around during his mayoralty, what was he doing during the 70s?
Well, David was a reformer in the sense that he, the city council had, prior to him, been fairly conservative, and they had a lot of development happening. So there was development happening that was out of scale, and in some people's mind was out of control. So David stepped in at the time as a kind of a voice of reason, and he had an ability to bring people around and to be a moderating influence. The former city archivist Victor Russell says, and I'll read this as well, and he says, for a combination of factors that included issues, values, intelligence, drive, personality, and timing, he Victor Russell has said that Crombie is our most popular and successful mayor. So he had a way about him to people together on issues in a confrontational way. It's, really, I guess, captured the slowing down of the out of control development happening in Toronto. They put a height bylaw in place that was fought by the development and construction industry, but it really helped really moderate the excesses of the situation at the time. The funny thing about David Crombie, when I researched him a bit, was that even in grade 5, he had tried to organize a student union in grade 5, and he has shown considerable character all his life.
This is all so fascinating, and we could talk about all the mayors, but I've got a couple questions. Who out of the mayors that you've worked for, or that you've researched, do you have a favorite mayor? Are you allowed to say that?
Well, I'm biased and partial. I think the mayor with whom I hold the greatest affection is Barbara Hall, and simply because I guess I know her the best and the closest, and we've always been friends and kept in touch, and she's just a very wonderful, caring person. I'll give you a little story about
Yeah,
Hall.
sure.
I'm a caregiver to a 78-year-old person who has mental health challenges, and she's had a really rough life and mental health issues, and she operates at the level, not at the complete level of her age, but Barbara Hall goes to visit her twice a week to just offer help, assistance, compassion, companionship, and to just make her feel good, because she has no other family, and I think that really shows the type of person that she is, and it's an incredible thing that she has done. She has no reason to do that either. Like, this person is a pretty vulnerable person, and yet Barbara's doing this out of sheer compassion.
That's nice to hear that she's still doing it. I mean, I remember, for whatever reason, that election pretty memorably, and I was quite young when it happened, but I remember she was, correct me if I'm wrong, but she was running against Mel Lastman, and this was the first election for the new mega city. Do I remember that correctly? I just remember waking up, because I went to bed before the election results come on, and my parents are avid CBC listeners, and they were gung-ho for Barbara Hall, and I remember waking up in the morning, and the radio was off, and the radio was always on in the morning, but the radio was off, and I inherently knew that she had lost, and it just had this weird sense that the city was rapidly changing, not just because of the mega city, but because of this new outlook and having Mel Lastman take over, and it was just an interesting time that I remember very fondly.
And it shows one thing too. Some of the mayor's best work even has been done post-mayoralty. Like, Barbara Hall went on to become the Commissioner of Human Rights in Ontario, and did wonderful work there. And another example is Art Eggleton. Art Eggleton, after becoming mayor and minister later, he went to the Senate, and some of his best work was done on the poverty file in the Senate, and really raising that issue. So it does show that you can, even John Sewell, John Sewell was only mayor 2 years, but since that time, he has kept a constant public persona in the sense of issues like housing, in terms of the mega city. He was dead against that and galvanized thousands of people. In terms of police reform, he has been on that issue for years. So it shows that post-mayoralty, there's and David Crombie himself, his Greenbelt work, he resigned a couple of years ago to protest the Ford government. Well before the Greenbelt scandal ever happened, he was protesting what they were doing as he was head of the Ontario Greenbelt Council at the time.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, I feel like, again, we could talk about hours for mayor, but try to keep this succinct. So, Mark, we wanted to thank you very, very much for your time. Could you tell me, where could people find your book?
It's available in most Indigo stores in Toronto and Kohl's. What I would, if you want to pick up the copy in person, you can go online to the Indigo website and see how many are in stock in each store. The other thing is the Dundurn, which is the publisher, has a bookstore on Queen Street in Leslieville. And the other one is
Port Local.
You can get it through Amazon. It's on the Amazon website, and they deliver for free.
Ooh, nice. So just so people don't have to rewind all the way to the beginning, what's the title of the book again?
It's Toronto Mayors, A History of the City's Leaders.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time. Guys, that concludes this episode. Again, we wanted to thank Mark for coming on. We'll have more guests in the future. We love bringing the guests on and just giving some great insight into some personal sides of Toronto history. So thank you so much, Mark. Adam, do you want to tell the people where they can find us?
Well, first, if you would like to get a hold of us, we are available at muddy_york@outlook.com. If you would like to contact us on Twitter, or if you'd like to find us at Twitter, we are Toronto_history. And if you want to find us on Facebook, it is Muddy York History, all one word.
Thanks, guys.